of the family court, provincial court. But many of the Canadian women and many of women who were practicing Muslims of a more liberal or middle-of-the-road variety objected very much to the fact that Sharia would be allowed in Canada, and the decision was that freedom of expression here in the state trumped freedom of religion, i.e. having Sharia courts, and all such tribunals were then abolished. So it's very fascinating, and there was another example about our Indigenous women who went to the UN to claim their rights when they were denied as divorced women right to shelter on their own reservations as part of the Indian Act. And the UN agreed in their favor, but the rights they were claiming were not just the rights to shelter. It was right to their own religion that they had been denied by colonization, in that they claimed that before colonization, they had the same status in their religions as men. They were the elders, they were ritual specialists, they were all regarded as not inferior to men. So it's very interesting that there are competitive rights today and complex ways of trying to handle that. So what I've done in my own teaching is I began to take another system for measuring the present situation of women in religion and their almost universal assignment to an inferior position or role in relation to men. Now, this is a strategic move on my part, and I don't eliminate using rights at all, particularly where there has been abuses. But I think this is a nice way of trying to get around all these insults that get hurled at women as feminists or after equality. I use a term I call symbolic status. This term has religious references, and it evaluates the respect or level of spiritual standing that is given to women in religious traditions. I ask a number of basic questions. These are: 1. Have women been accorded the same spiritual respect and stature as men? Are they allowed to become leaders of both men and women? And here I'm thinking big. Have there been women popes? Well, there's, the eponymous Pope Joan at some stage. Have they become ayatollahs? Now, to be an ayatollah or a pope is not necessarily always a benign activity, but nonetheless, have they become leaders of various lineages where they have, direction over both men and women? Secondly, are women accepted as ritual specialists who are allowed to perform the same religious ceremonies as men? Or, if they perform different ritual roles, are these regarded as having the same worth as those performed by men? 3, do women have access to the same standard of education as men in religious matters? Are women permitted to read the specific sacred texts in their original language, to translate and comment on these texts, and have their translation and commentaries accepted and used by male scholars? Are they allowed to read these texts in public ceremonies attended by everybody? And are they then also themselves allowed to teach both men and women, particularly those who are training for spiritual roles? Finally, is a woman's body regarded as impure, polluted, and thus as a distraction from the spiritual path? Or is it viewed as less worthy of honor and respect, and thus liable to be degraded and exploited? The specific terms that would be answers to these questions may vary according to the religion, but by and large, it would be extraordinarily difficult to find a religion where women have been given the same symbolic status as men in all of the above categories, unless, of course, they were religions for women only. Now, what I am saying is not news to many people here, especially those who have worked in religious studies, or those of you who have themselves come up against certain barriers that I've mentioned in those questions. What is of most concern to me is how to strategize and work together to meet these present challenges from both conservative and fundamental elements who do not want things to change for women in religion. In order to illustrate this theory of symbolic status and to make clear what is involved, I use as an example the work and ideas of Bhikkhuni Dhammananda of Thailand, whose temple and compound near Bangkok in Thailand I have visited twice. Although she doesn't use the expression symbolic status in her writings and her advocacy for the full ordination of bhikkhunis in Thailand, Bhikkhuni Dhammananda indicates, or the Venerable Dhammananda indicates, a connection between what I call the low symbolic status of women in Thailand and the violence and disrespect with which they are treated, especially in the sex trade. She says, in Thailand, women's spiritual potential is belittled, and this occurs because of the negative attitudes towards women. Now, she is supported in this by many women, including academics. She herself, that I'm not sure most people know, was trained, got her doctorate in religious studies at the University of McMaster in Canada, or McMaster University. I wanted to give another quote from her as well. People do not understand, and she doesn't mince her words, people do not understand what the connection is between this ordinational problem and the problem of prostitutes, for example. I try to bring this out in my presentations. When women cannot become ordained because the image of woman is so negative, that pushes women to the other end of the spectrum. That's why the doors to brothels are open to women. And that is why the doors are closed for women to become nuns. I talk about the need to see social issues as holistic. You cannot separate them. Dhammananda's argument is that by allowing the ordination of women, women's symbolic status, although as I said she does not use this term, would be raised and strengthened. According to her, such a move would also help to alleviate the disrespect and abuse to which ordinary women are submitted in many aspects of Thai culture. While this may be a particularly graphic example, it does help to bring into focus the many ways that male-dominated religions have excluded and denied women access to religious participation. It is interesting to compare this situation in Thailand then with that of the conservative elements I talked about at the beginning of the paper, who did not sign that declaration to eliminate violence against women. What I see that there is a major problem here in that when women are disrespected, there is abuse, there is violence, and whether or not Dhammananda is right, I do understand how looking at these problems from a holistic perspective could be another strategy in a way to try and counter these conservative elements. Now, and that's what I say, while I wouldn't dismiss human rights entirely as part of the continuing situation or solution, if certain human rights are being violated by religion, we do have to resort to it. But I think we need to have a more, shall we say, versatile means of strategizing to obtain access for women to various, levels of practice in religion. Now, and I say this because I don't think human rights can even begin to address what I consider to be the deep-seated and pervasive forms of religious prejudice that inform this inferior status of women and the consequent, shall I say, disinterested, or disinclination to act by men in a supportive way. Or the suspicion one gets when one talks about trying to change this situation in the light of what's going on with these conservative people. And so my main worry is, and the reason I presented this paper here, is, as I said, many people seem to be unaware of the struggle, not so much in the Buddhist circles about what we know about Thailand, but about these conservative people that are also in some ways, I think, reinforcing this dynamic. Now, they want to turn the clock back, in other words, and so what's happening with these conservative fundamental religious forces is that, how have I put it here? they want to erase, if we could put it that way, or at least stop all the gains that have been made by women during the 20th century. Now, their claim that their tradition is true is not necessarily to be accepted as valid, though, and whereas I want to point to the wonderful work that has been done by superb women scholars, as we heard in the films last night, of going back to the original sources, because they have been educated in the sacred languages, of going back into the historical record. And what I just want to say in conclusion, what they have been able to show, in many ways, is that the founders of certain of the great religions of the world, such as the Buddha, Christ, and Muhammad, did in their time treat women with respect and dignity and allowed them freedoms, though they would not have used that term, that were unusual for their time and their culture. Once they died, however, and the religions were institutionalized, the reflex actions of their cultures sort of sprung back into the traditional attitudes and activities and actions towards women. And the tradition took over what women had gained at that time. My hope is that we will not let that happen again. Thank you.
Gender order. Venerable Chow Hui-shi was born in Burma and now resides in Taiwan. She's a professor at Hongxi Buddhist Institute and at the Graduate School of Religious Studies of Swanchuan University in Taiwan. She is an outspoken social critic and was the first to speak out publicly against the 8 special rules.
The most respectable, venerables, Dharma sisters, ladies and gentlemen, I will present my paper, including the 2 issues. One of the issues is the receiving preception, both orders, and the other issue is the inescapable gender orders, but formally ordained bhikkhunis. I hope that they could live with dignity and equality with the bhikkhus within the community and not appear as the servant of the bhikkhus. However, when I mentioned this to the Dalai Lama and the other Tibetan bhikkhus, they were consistent in their answer. That is, the lineage of bhikkhuni has been broken. When I suggested that they may regain the lineage through the Chinese Mahayana Bhikkhunis order, the one of the 2 questions that all of them were concerned about was, did the Chinese Bhikkhunis receive their precepts in both orders and have the lineage never be broken? Receiving precepts in both orders means that when a female follower wants to take the Bhikkhunis precepts, she must take the precepts in front of 10 bhikkhus as well as in front of the 10 bhikkhunis in the nuns order. To explain in simpler terms, when a female wants to become a bhikkhuni, first of all, the nuns order must form a special committee consisting of 10 bhikkhunis and examine whether the person fulfills the requirements to take full ordination. Then the monks order also forms a committee consisting of 10 bhikkhus to review the person's qualification. This practice might have been needed when the nuns order was first established. This is because they had just started their journey in the field of practice. Due to their lack of experience, their examination or certification process might not have been as thoughtful as it should have been. They might not have been able to justify whether a person was suitable to renounce lay life and become ordained. Thus, the Buddha set forth a rule that the order of nuns needed the help of the monks' order, which that had been established for years and had the experience to double check. However, the nuns order has now been established for more than 2,000 years. And surprisingly, the Buddhist community in general still holds tightly to the set rule that bhikshunis must precepts in both the order. This is amount to using the rules and regulations to restrict the life and death right of the bhikshunis. The duties of helping have returned into special privilege control. Now, no wonder the bhikshunis of the Tibetan and Theravada tradition became extinct. I have argued strongly based on these reasons. In my opinion, the system of recognizing reincarnate lamas or living Buddhas was not handed down by the Buddha. Yet Tibetans seems to have no misgiving about the correctness of this practice and have continued it for many years. I have also pointed out directly that the discontinuation of the lineage of nuns was certainly related to obstructions of bhikshus. It is impossible that it was the bhikshunis wish to become extinct. Only bhikshus might try to suppress the bhikshunis. The order of bhikshunis is able to develop consents and refuse to form a committee of 10 bhikshus to satisfy the bhikshunis' ordination. When this happens, after several 10 years or so, the bhikshunis will be extinct in that area. The great master Bhikshu Hongyi Dashi once said that he is a famous Chinese Bhikshu. Since the later Song dynasty, about 1,000 years ago, the lineage of bhikkhus has been broken. According to his logic, the 10 masters that satisfy the ordination of bhikkhus or bhikkhunis must be virtuous. However, because the 10 masters were ordinary beings, it is unavoidable that some may have broken the precepts or been involved in shameful matters. Their qualifications are not perfect. Does this mean that since the late Song dynasty, no bhikkhus have been perfectly qualified? Strictly speaking, whether it is bhikkhus or bhikkhunis, if this is the yardstick that we use to justify the lineage, then I can be sure that no lineage is perfect. According to this, even the bhikkhus' lineage has been broken, since using that criteria, neither the bhikkhu or bhikkhuni lineage could be called perfect in accordance with the Dharma. How can the question of lineage be used as an excuse to claim that the order of bhikshunis cannot be established because of their lineage has been broken? This is the dilute logic of the theory that one is everything or one links everything. It was bound together the concept of qualification to practice and lineage, and also whether one obtained the precept or not, and whether it was satisfied by 10 bhikkhus into inevitable relationship. According to this logic, we could also link whether one obtains the precept or not, and whether it was satisfied by 10 bhikkhus into a consequential relationship. Using this topic of deductive logics, one obtains precepts because of 10 bhikkhus who are pure. If this were the case, the next generation would need a square of 10 in order to obtain the precepts. That is, the purify of 100%. The next generation after that would need a cubic of 10, the purify of 1,000 persons in order to obtain precepts. As this continues, it will develop to the nth power of 10. According to these calculations, not only would there have been no bhikkhus during the late Song dynasty, there would have been no bhikshu in order in the world much earlier than that. In a theory that fixes one's fate according to circumstances, where is the place of free will, the principal matrix of our behavior? According to the theory of development of dependent origination, Pratitya Samuppada, the success of everything relies on the cooperation of causes and conditions. However, the main reason for one to be able to change one's fate, the possibility for an ordinary person to transform into a noble one, lies in one's mind. The determination of one's mind is still the principal condition for freeing oneself from the imprisonment of fate. Thus, whether a practitioner can obtain pure precepts or not, all other reasons are secondary conditions. The most important condition is one's sincerity in repenting and rectifying oneself, and the strong determination into an transgression and do good deeds. Let's analyze further the profound implication of the need for 10 bhikkhus to be the satisfiers. In my opinion, one of the purposes of these rules is to give the precept taker. Sorry, my pen is. What? Sorry. In my opinion, one of the purposes of these rules is to give the precept takers a sense of security by establishing a fair procedure. If the decision as to whether one can be a member of the Sangha relies on one person, it is difficult to avoid unfair judgments based on persons' feelings or gratitude, resentment, or personal prejudice. Thus, to provide fair treatment for those who want to take precepts, then it is reasonable to have 10 bhikkhus to be the satisfied. Furthermore, as stated in the Vinaya, the preceptors needed to ask the precept seekers about potential stumbling blocks that could obstruct them from taking precepts. That is, objective questions to determine whether the person is qualified to take the precepts. This shows that even if there are 10 bhikkhus as the satisfier, these bhikkhus cannot make judgments freely according to their own will, based on the one and link it with everything. The result is that whether or not one is qualified to be a practitioner and perfect in their practice. What is the difference between this formulation and saying that one's fate is determined by the mercy of God? Which of these two theories has the better odds of winning? A clever gambler will definitely prefer to place assembling 10 ordinary person who are pure is more difficult than obtaining the goal he has created. The chances of winning such a bet are certainly easy.
Thank you, Venerable Chao Kuichi. Next.
Good morning, everybody. My dearest, venerable, and all brothers and sisters. First of all, I like to tell all the Buddha's action are social action. Okay? And right now, we are walking the social, protecting young girls from sex trafficking in Nepal. In the mountain of Nepal, most people are poor and uneducated, and for generation girls in this impoverished region have been tricked or sold by their relatives into prostitution. During the People War, 1996 to 2006, and its turbulent afterward, desperation born of poverty increased. Today, because many fathers, husbands, and adult sons were killed or disappeared during the war, leaving their families without a provider. More young girls have ever before have fallen victim to the scourge of sex trafficking. Parents believe that getting a daughter married is their most important responsibility. But getting her married means that they must provide her with a dowry which they cannot afford unless the girl herself makes significant contribution. Vihara, we provide refuse, Buddhist and secular education from a small number of children. This paper tells the story of how we started the program, how we keep it going, and our plans of expansion, how we began. In 2002, on our way back to Nepal from 7th Satyadhita conference at Huafan University in Taipei, Taiwan, Dr. Hema invited us to stop off in Cambodia in order to see the nuns' education program she had established there. While we were in the country, we spent 3 days in a monastery at Siem Reap, where the monks were caring for adult AIDS patients. For the short time we were there, we helped the cook, a nun, as it happened. With food preparation, neither of us had ever seen people suffering from AIDS before, and we were shocked by what we saw. Shortly after returning to Kathmandu, we read an article in the local newspaper telling how over the previous few years, 5,000 HIV-infected girls have been brought back from brothels in various India cities to the shelter in Kathmandu, known as Maitri, Nepal. We decided to visit place. What we saw there both horrible and inspired us. On the one hand, the oldest girl, who was only 15, told us he had been sold into the brothels at the age 6. On the other hand, we were impressed by what Maitri Nepal, which, with funding from several foreign sources, both individuals and foundation, was offering these children a clear place to live, good food, a kind of compassionate steps, medical care, and for those who were still healthy enough, a literacy program and vocational education. After our visit, we said to each other, but those poor children are already infected and are likely to die before long. Wouldn't prevention program be better than a rescue program? And we decided what somehow we would start such a program. But where? We had no place of our own when we were already heavily committed to teaching in the Antioch program at Bodh Gaya every autumn and alternative years at the University of Dayton and Wilmington College in the US. And then there was the question of where we would find the money. We knew that the woman who in 1993 had started Maitri Nepal had connection in higher circles, both Nepal and abroad, where to house our program. It's happened that Khemdol Vihar, the oldest nunnery in Kathmandu, which had been founded in the 1940s by the famous nun Dharmachari Anagarika, had fallen on hard time. The building were in very bad repair. All the nuns, with the exception of 3 very elderly ones, had left, and the laity had virtually withdrawn their support. The Khemdol Sangha barely existed anymore. It was then that our teacher, Bhikkhuni Dhammawati, abbess of Dharmakirti Vihara, asked us to take over the Vihara in 2004. We did so. First, we had a special puja in order to cleanse and purify the ground, in addition to Nepalese senior monks and nuns. We invited some Burmese monks from Saranath, India, and Lumbini attended the puja. And then we went to work renovating the temple. We cleaned the land which had become, because we have not a place for her in our temple. But whenever we returned to Dading, this mother would press us and press us until, seeing how wretchedly the little girl was living early last year, we were agreed to accept her. More recently, we took 4 girls from Lumbini. Mother has ran off with another man, leaving her with a drunkard of the father. In this case, when we saw the little girl helping her father to clean the toilet of the Nepalese Vihara a few hundred feet from tree under where the Buddhist was born, it was we who begged the father to let us take the child, building the program. Soon after each girl's arrived, we have shaved their head, giving her the Dharma name, and dressed her in the dark red novice Rishini robe. When the first came, they were all, marvelous as the cover is liars, and their skin was very dirty and very scary. They spoke only their local language, and they knew nothing about hygiene, how they use the toilet, and even how to eat food properly. They would gobble the meal if they were starving. This was the first food they would ever see. They needed to learn many basic things, but learn them they did, and within a month and 2, they were communicating quite well in Nepali. We feel very strongly that keeping children isolated in the Vihara isn't a good idea. Perhaps the most important reason is that before they can make a firm commitment to the Sangha, they should be very familiar not only with the religious life they are entering, but the lay life they are living. To this end, in our view, it is essential that our Rishini go to the school with lay children of both sexes and have friendship with and grow up with ordinary kids, so that the time comes to take the precepts. They are the position to make the informed and responsibly decision. Thus, rather, when we leave our vihara to teach in Bodh Gaya and everywhere, and they feel confidence that Ditima, Gunashri, Tushita, and Sukhita are the good heads. The two most pressed problems we have, the first, the children's health, because they are often very sick. So we have provide for them the medicine. It's very expensive. And the second problem, because problem is, the parents are continuously asking to take their children. We would like to accept more. We are unable to do so because until we finish our building project, we have nowhere to house them. Though thus far fundraising to complete construction has been going quite slow, we are optimistic. We know
with the traditional Zen saying, don't just do something, stand there. I did not discover this old Zen saying while listening to a Dharma talk, nor did I find it tucked within the pages of a new koan collection or in an academic journal, but rather on the website for the Farmington, Maine chapter of the Women in Black, and I'll refer to that now as WIB. Eileen Kreutz, one of the Women in Black, uses it to open her reflections on her use of silence in the WIB anti-war protests. While Eileen never identifies herself as a Buddhist, nor affiliates herself with any particular religious or ethical tradition, many of the experiences of silence she recounts will resonate with Buddhist practitioners, especially those who are involved with socially engaged Buddhist movements. Eileen's is one of 9 different accounts written by women who have dedicated themselves to practicing silence during their protest vigils. Like Eileen, some of the women never identify with a particular religious or ethical tradition. Others, like Cragen Healy and Lee Sharkey, strongly identify with their religious heritage and understand their silent practice as a natural outgrowth of their Christian or Jewish faith. Despite these differences, their accounts of silence share a sensibility with that expressed in the old Zen saying. That is the sensibility of samatha, or cessation. As it is defined by Thich Nhat Hanh, samatha is the practice of stopping, calming, resting, and healing. Samatha, the gradual practice of dropping or wisdom practiced by Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh and Venerable Sister Chan Kum and the Plum Village community. According to Thich Nhat Hanh, the practice of calming, resting, and stopping are preconditions for healing and hence are foundational to any meaningful social change. He writes, if we cannot stop, the course of our destruction will just continue. The world needs healing. Individuals, communities, and nations need healing. As a teacher of women's and gender studies, I have become increasingly aware that my students do not know how to stop, calm, and heal. Consequently, as they become aware of the injustices of gender inequities in the world, their first response is to get angry, often really angry, and they are often impelled to do something, usually in anger, right away. Now, of course, I am all aware of the suffering in the world and to be of help to others. But more often than not, I see my well-intentioned students plan protests that go terribly wrong. or go no place at all. Anger takes a lot of energy. The burnout rate among student activists is enormously high. In response to this problem, I have begun to develop a class on women and socially engaged Buddhism with an eye to helping students cultivate the resources of inner calm and peace that they hope to find in the world. I find that the narrative accounts of the women in black, in these examples, important ways of the transformative potential of silence to change our relationship to the world. The meanings that each of the women draw from their practices of silence are multi-layered and complex, and of course the meaning of silence is determined from the very particular contexts and circumstances in which they are embedded, from the responses it elicits in others, such as passerby, as well as from the meanings that are intended by the women who enact the silence. Nevertheless, when we consider these different accounts, I believe we can draw out some common themes, what I am calling the samatha of silence, alliances that could help ground, or at least intensify or enhance the practices of each, where each strikes me as exemplary of nonviolent restraint in the face of overt violence. Before I turn to a discussion of the samatha of silence, it is helpful first to provide a bit of background information about the group Women in Black. Women in Black was inspired by early protest movements, refusing violence, militarism, and war, such as Black Sash in South Africa, the Madres de la Plaza de Mayo in Argentina, the Women's International League for Peace, and the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp in the UK. Women in Black found its first incarnation in Israel in 1988 when the Palestinian Intifada began. A group of Israeli Jewish women began to gather in public and stand in protest of the Israeli occupation. To signify their grief and mourning, they all dressed in black. Although the first vigils were not held in silence, the protests were sober events. There was no chanting or recitation of slogans. Their silence rather developed gradually, out of a shared commitment not to repay violence with violence, by shouting back at the many hecklers who frequently hurled abuse at them, and usually sexualized comments. Their silence grew out of the attempt to maintain their dignity and safeguard the dignity of their purpose. From Israel, the movement gradually spread to other countries like Canada, the US, Australia, and many European countries. Thus began a worldwide movement in which women who were sympathetic with the cause of ending the Israeli occupation stood in silent solidarity with their Israeli and Palestinian sisters. As tensions and violence between Israelis and Palestinians proliferated and intensified in the context of other conflicts, the Women in Black movement continued to stage anti-war and pro-peace actions, holding silent vigils during the Gulf War, the US invasion of Afghanistan, and more recently, the US invasion of Iraq. Since the time of the first protests, in which silence emerged as a response to holding or heckling, the purpose and meaning of silence within the WIB movement has changed, becoming more complex and variable. Though we would be hard-pressed to reduce their silence to any particular function or role, it is effective in organizing nonviolent protests. The movement has grown in membership, it has received international acclaim and recognition, and has mobilized women in many countries. The silence draws hecklers as well as media attention, and is sometimes met with police and military control. And yet, the Women in Black retain the value of silence in what I think is a complex and polyvalent way. To try to better grasp the complexity of the protest, I organize and highlight 4 distinctive samatha of silence. 1, silence as the samatha of, or the cessation of trivializing and co-opting political discourse. 2, silence and the cessation of dogmatically judging others whose political views differ from my own. 3, silence as the samatha of women's oppression and historic silencing, through learning to occupy silence differently. And 4, silence is the samatha of setting fixed categories and borders between myself and other, victim and victimizer, oppressor and oppressed. These samatha of silence give structure and meaning to the political practices of women in Black, connecting the felt sense of dignity and the perceptions of their effectiveness to Buddhist practices that thematize silence in a rich way. And that is silence as transformative practice, especially as it relates to bringing together women from diverse religious practices to create an interfaith community and peace alliance. Silence as the samatha of, silence as transformative practice. Since its inception as a response to the Palestinian Intifada, the Women in Black have been dedicated to promoting interfaith dialogue and community among women from different religious backgrounds. This is particularly apparent in the WIB chapter in Farmington, Maine, where women self-identify as Christians, Quakers, and Jews, but also as having no particular religious affiliation. Many of the women talk about silence in conjunction with their inner transformation and healing that occurs during the silent vigils. And many of them relate this healing back to their own religious or spiritual practice. For some, like Craig and Healy, silence gives her a time for silent prayer, at which time she prays both for her enemies and also for guidance to become a peacemaker. Rita Kimber identifies a spiritual part of her practice as well, likening it to her silent practice in Quaker meetings. She says, in the silence, we try to feel our connection to God or the world soul or whatever you want to call it, trying to be an atom weighing in on the side of peace in the great universe. Lee Sharkey talks about the way silence helps her mourn and work through her anger at the policies of the Israeli state. She writes, as a Jew, I have been appalled by Israel's response to the Second Intifada. I take this personally. I come to Women in Black in solidarity with Israeli women in Black to make my resistance to war on all fronts visible, without hatred, to say, die, enough already. I mourn all dead. I would just say this practice of silence, the process of stopping, calming, and resting and healing, resonates deeply with our own Buddhist practices of samatha. As sitting together each morning, we unite in our silence beyond our different practice lineages and traditions. And perhaps, too, we will be moved to stand in silence with our sisters and Women in Black to help heal the many conflicts that threaten peace on earth. Thank you.
In small groups, as we did yesterday. And the topic is Buddhist and social engagement.
The contribution made by Buddhist nuns to the spread of the Dhamma in Nepal cannot be underestimated. Nuns have been no less energetic and courageous than the monks who pioneered the teaching of Theravada Buddhism early in the 20th century. These 20th century nuns inherited a long tradition of service to the Dhamma. In the Lichavi period, a bhikkhuni sangha existed in the Kathmandu Valley. In the 1920s, 5 monks were ordained in Tibetan Mul Sarvastivadian Buddhist lineage under Guru Tshering Norbu. Among those 5 bhikkhus, Venerable Mahapragya was the most newar monk to be ordained in the Tibetan tradition. Later, he was ordained in India in Theravada tradition by Guru Chandramani Mahastabir of Myanmar. Soon afterwards, in 1934, Anagarika Dhammachari, together with her 5 Nepalese disciples who also ordained in India, Thus, the ordination of Theravada monks and nuns were re-established at the same time. Nun Dharmachari was born in a middle-class family of Kathmandu in the year 1898 AD. She was the fourth daughter from her parents, Mr. Man Kaji Tuladhar and Ratnamaya Tuladhar of Asantol. For her elderly childhood, she was very intelligent and brilliant. She yearned to learn and study. There was no school and college for girls in those days, so she never had opportunity to go to school. When she was 10 years old, she was given in marriage to Setikaji Baniyar of Itumbal. This family was specialized in dealing with herbal medicines. He gave birth to a son at the age of 8, observing triple refuge and 5 precepts. She persuaded her family member in giving up bad habit of sacrificing animals on different occasions. She thought that she could help the society only after renouncing the household life. During her initial years, she composed a series of Dhamma songs to arouse Buddhist awareness among people. This led to the completion of Gyanmala, a garland of Buddhist hymn. The Rana government regarded the Theravada movement as political opposition. Later, she decided to be ordained as nun and went to Kushinagar at 1934. She established a separate nunnery at the north of Kindol Bahal. During Rana government, they summoned all the monks and nuns to the government office and ordered to sign a document which contains the following prohibitions: not to perform Buddha Puja in Bihar, not to give teachings of Buddhism, not to ordain lay people. Since the prohibitionary rules were not acceptable to the monks and nuns, they refused to sign the documents. As a result, the then ruling authorities led by Rana Prime Minister declared that the monks and nuns, about 8 in number, will be banished from the country in the year 1944. Thinking that it would be difficult to propagate Dhamma in Kathmandu, group of nuns moved to Trisuli in Nuwakot district. The devotees of Trisuli were overjoyed and received them with great respect. But unfortunately, the nuns' arrival was reported to Prime Minister Chandra Shamsher, who immediately ordered them to meet him. When Dhammachari and her fellow nuns compiled, the Prime Minister, Captain Chandra Bahadur, asked her many questions. Venerable Dhammachari answered with a song as recorded in the text Gyanmala. After listening to her hymns, the captain asked, "Who gave you food? Why do you live in this way?" Dhammachari replied, "We are wearing yellow robes and living a life of renunciates, begging alms for food." The captain again asked, "Who is your teacher?" Dhammachari replied, "Lord Buddha is our teacher." The captain continued asking her with questions. Fearlessly, Dhammachari answered him all. Finally, the captain realized her thinking that there were no reason to imprison her. In this way, Dhammachari overcame her difficulties, continued her teaching, and thereby awakened Nepali people to Buddha Dhamma. In a gathering of her lay disciple, Venerable Dhammachari proposed to erect a Buddha statue in the Parinirvana position in a new temple and a nunnery. Her proposal was unanimously accepted in 1948. After the materials needed for construction of the statue were collected, construction began. After the completion of statue itself, temple construction began in 1952. The nunnery was inaugurated by the then Crown Prince Mahendra Bir Bikram Sahadev. Thousands of devotees flocked to see the Mahaparinirvana statue of Lord Buddha. After the completion of Nirvana statue, many female devotees visited the nunnery, and it was found that there was not enough space to accommodate all the visitors. Venerable Dhammachari proposed to establish a guest house for lay female devotees near the Parinirvana statue. She lived a long, meaningful life in spite of many difficulties and problems. Finally, she passed away in the year 1977. At present, the Kindle Nunnery is under the care of two educated nuns, Dr. Dhamavijay and Dr. Domolini, who are present here in this conference. Both of them are actively engaging for innovation of the nunnery with their zeal and energy.
Education has been one of the most important issues for the Thai Buddhist nuns. Now nuns and lay women, they have their own right to enter Buddhist college, as well as the foreign nuns and lay women can enter Buddhist college for their studies, higher education. It has long been an important issue for many nuns, since the nuns have been shut out from the formal Buddhist education in Thailand. Their capacities to facilitate education has been limited by the fact that it basically has relied on nuns organizing education for themselves. They have mostly been dependent on private donation, and religious education for women in Thailand has thus been largely a private individual responsibilities. Hampers, the nun college is affiliated to one of the monks' universities, Mahamakot Buddhist University, for financial reasons. It would not have been possible to open nuns' college without the sponsors from the monks. Machi Kunyin Kanita together with the nuns at the Thailand Institute proposes the Mahamakot Buddhist University to authorize the nuns' college, and they adopted the proposal in November 1998. The building process. Meiji Kunyin Kanita wanted the college to get started as soon as possible. However, in 1998, the college did not yet have any building at the land in Nakhon Ratchasima province, and therefore the college began as a so-called pilot project in May 1999. The first 3 years, the college was located in the vicinities of the Association for the Promotion of the Status of Women on the outskirts of Bangkok, a place with different enterprise that Meiji Kunyin Kanita had founded. When the college was constructed, many buildings such as one multi-purpose meditation hall is used for chanting meditation. It is also used for education of the children Buddhist Sunday school. The Nuns Institute Foundation, in cooperation with Mahapajapati Buddhist College, initiated the work of establishing the new adjoining with Mahapajapati Buddhist College with 33 rights of land, approximately around 16 acres, which bought by supporting of Thailand Institute and Buddhist devotees. This nunnery is named Mongkon Suratnari. The dining hall is being constructed. It can be filled with 500 people for one-time Buddhist camp function. It's activity for the villagers at the college. The college is a valuable asset not only for the nuns but also for the neighboring lay community, and the college runs a Sunday school for children in the village nearby. The numbers of children who attend the Sunday school is increasing every year. In last year, usually between 60 and children around 100 come to the college on Sunday. The college also provide food and also non-food. The college also run various short vocational training courses for the villagers. Here, government had granted the budget about 8 million baht for Mahapajapati Buddhist College to be constructed of 2 dormitories. They are being constructed now. The student can stay 2 persons for 1 room. There are bathroom and restroom.
It's open for Dhamma education of women in Bhutan. Bhutan is the only country that recognizes Vajrayana Buddhism as its official religion. Bhutanese women have a position of honor in the society where the family system is matriarchal, that is, daughters inherit the family estate. However, up until less than a decade ago, nuns in Bhutan did not receive the same educational opportunities as the monks. There was no study program whereby the nuns could learn Buddhism and realize the highest teachings. At best, the nuns were only able to conduct prayers and recite mantras without being able to understand what those mantras meant. Nuns were also confined to doing household chores, which effectively limited their potential and growth in their spiritual practice. However, the women who wanted to learn the Buddhism had to study in India or Nepal, where study programs were available to them. However, the situation in present-day Bhutan has changed for the better. This paper focuses on the changes which are currently taking place in Bhutan with respect to Buddhist educations for nuns. A personal account of the challenges which I have to face as a Buddhist nun pursuing tertiary education is also discussed in brief. In the early days, there were no nuns studying Buddhism in Bhutan. The nuns were only nuns in name, but did not perform the role of nuns. In practice, they stayed at home and looked after the children or helped in the kitchen in cooking, etc. Later, they learned to read and recite the prayers and mantras. Bhutanese women who wished to devote their lives to spiritual practice did not have the same opportunities as the male counterpart. There are more than 2,000 monasteries for monks, but only 12 nunneries in the entire kingdom. These monasteries and institutions train monks to receive the highest teachings, to ensure a teaching lineage, but are exclusively male. Bhutanese women long to become teachers and abbesses to their nunneries to receive in training for the special practices such as debate and sacred dances. Therefore, Bhutanese women had to travel to India or Nepal to receive teachings where India could offer what Bhutan lacked, that is, structured study programs in Buddhist studies for women. The higher spiritual training and education opportunities for Buddhist nuns. Realizing the plight of Bhutanese nuns who long for an opportunity to receive the highest teaching, the Queen Mother, Her Majesty the Queen, Sri Nyangdon, has taken the task of re-establishing a female line of transmission and to improve the living conditions of Bhutanese nuns as her personal projects. Among some of the projects which she is embarking on is a university for the nuns so that they may receive the highest training and rebuild the female lineage that was broken in the 11th century. Together with some very dedicated members of the Sangha, efforts are already underway to establish institutes for higher studies for nuns in Bhutan. There are at least 4 nunneries which have a systematic study program in Bhutan with varying study programs and subjects, etc. One such